The helicopter's rotor wash scattered ash and debris across the Raccoon City skyline as Jason Statham checked his weapon for the third time in as many minutes. Below, the streets looked wrong. Too empty for 9 p.m. on a Thursday. Too many fires burning unchecked. Too much smoke rising from the downtown district. His client's briefing had mentioned civil unrest and a potential quarantine, standard extraction work for triple the usual rate. The kind of money that bought silence and didn't ask questions. LZ is 2 blocks from the target address. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. Police scanners going haywire. Reports of, Christ, I don't even know what these people are saying. Mass casualty event. Multiple officers down, some kind of... The explosion hit from nowhere. 1 second they were descending toward the rendezvous point. The next the sky turned orange, and the helicopter lurched sideways as shrapnel tore through the tail rotor. Statham's training took over instantly. Feet braced, harness released, eyes tracking the spin rate and calculating impact vectors. The pilot screamed something unintelligible as they dropped into a death spiral. The crash was controlled chaos. Statham kicked out the side door half a second before the helicopter slammed through a second-story office window, tucked into a roll that turned broken glass into a glittering storm around him, and came up in a 3-point stance with his Glock 17 already clearing leather. Behind him, twisted metal groaned and aviation fuel spread across cheap carpet in an expanding pool. The pilot hung motionless in his harness, neck at an angle that told Statham everything he needed to know. He was alone in a city that smelled like a slaughterhouse. The office building was dark, emergency lighting casting everything in sickly red. Statham moved to the shattered window and looked down at the street below. What he saw made him unconsciously tighten his grip on the Glock. People, if you could still call them that, wandered in shambling clusters. Their movements were wrong, jerky, and purposeless, like marionettes with half their strings cut. One of them, a woman in a tattered business suit, looked up at the sound of the crash. Her face was gray, her jaw hanging at an impossible angle, and when she opened her mouth, dark fluid spilled down her chin. Bloody hell, Statham muttered, his East London accent thickening the way it always did before things went sideways. A moan rose from somewhere in the building's darkness behind him. Then another, then a chorus of them, wet and hungry and getting closer. He'd done extractions in war zones, black sites, and failed states, but he'd never heard anything that sounded like that. It was the sound of something that had forgotten how to be human, but still remembered how to hunt. Statham pulled a tactical flashlight from his belt and swept the beam across the office space. Overturned desks, scattered papers, and there, smeared across the wall in arterial spray, blood. A lot of it. The handprints led toward the stairwell door, which hung open like a mouth. The moaning was coming from there, getting louder, accompanied now by the shuffle drag of feet that didn't lift properly. He moved to the door in a smooth crouch, weapon up, flashlight in a modified Harry's stance. The stairwell was a vertical tunnel of shadows and that god-awful smell. Rotting meat mixed with something chemical, almost sweet. 3 flights down, shapes moved in the darkness. Pale faces turned upward toward his light, and the moaning intensified. Right then, Statham said quietly, more to himself than anything else. Clients paying for an extraction. Can't extract anyone if I'm dead. First priority, survive. Second priority, figure out what the hell is happening. Third priority, get paid. He let the stairwell door swing shut and moved toward the opposite end of the office floor, already cataloging resources. The building was some kind of pharmaceutical company. Umbrella Corporation, according to the logo on the wall. Desk drawers yielded a letter opener, a heavy stapler, and a half-full bottle of something flammable from the break room. Not an arsenal, but he'd worked with less. A window at the far end overlooked a narrow alley. 1 floor down, a fire escape. Statham holstered the Glock, grabbed an office chair, and hurled it through the glass. The sound of breaking glass echoed across the dead city like a dinner bell. Below in the street, heads turned. The shuffling mob began to coalesce, drawn by noise, moving with that horrible jerking gait toward the building. He didn't wait to watch. 3 running steps, and he launched himself through the window frame, hit the fire escape platform hard enough to make the whole structure shudder, and was already descending before the first of those things reached the alley entrance below. The ladder was rusted, each rung a gamble. But Statham moved with the efficiency of a man who'd spent his life in situations where hesitation meant death. He hit the ground in a combat crouch, Glock tracking left then right. The alley was clear for now, but that wouldn't last. The moaning was everywhere now, echoing off buildings, coming from broken windows and shadowed doorways. Raccoon City wasn't in crisis. It was already dead. He was just the last one to get the memo. A scream cut through the night, high and terrified and human. It came from somewhere north, toward what looked like a police station barricade, its floodlights cutting white columns through the smoke-hazed air. Where there were lights, there might be survivors. Where there were survivors, there might be answers. Statham checked his magazine, 15 rounds plus 1 in the chamber, and started moving through the shadows, every sense on high alert. He'd been hired to extract 1 person from a city in quarantine. Nobody had mentioned the dead walking. Nobody had mentioned whatever the hell had turned Raccoon City into an abattoir. But Jason Statham hadn't survived 2 decades in the world's worst hellholes by following the brief. He survived by adapting, by reading the situation, by being the hardest bastard in any room. And right now, the situation was simple. Find out what was happening, find survivors, and find a way out before this entire city burned. A figure lurched from a doorway 3 meters ahead. A man in a police uniform, badge still gleaming despite the blood covering everything else. The thing that used to be a cop reached for Statham with hands that had fingers bent backward at the joints. Its mouth opened, releasing that wet moan, and Statham saw that its tongue was black and swollen. He didn't waste ammunition. 1 quick step inside the thing's reach, elbow strike to the temple that would have dropped any living human, and nothing. The cop thing barely registered the impact, just kept reaching, kept moaning. Statham's tactical mind recalibrated instantly. Traditional targets weren't working. New rules. He grabbed the thing by its uniform collar, used its forward momentum to spin it face first into the brick wall with bone-crushing force, then brought his boot down on the back of its skull with every pound of his body weight behind it. The skull cracked like pottery. The thing stopped moving. "Headshots," Statham said, breathing controlled despite the adrenaline. Noted. If you want to see more characters survive different horror universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them fight through down in the comments below. In Resident Evil, survival comes at a price. The police station was 6 blocks through hell. Statham started walking, his shadow stretching long behind him in the firelight, heading into the heart of a nightmare that was just beginning to understand what it meant to face a man who refused to die. The streets of Raccoon City had become a maze of overturned vehicles and scattered corpses. Some still, others twitching with the preliminary spasms of whatever infection had consumed the city. Statham moved through the chaos with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd navigated Mogadishu during the Civil War and the favelas of São Paulo during cartel crackdowns. The difference was that, in those hellholes, the enemy followed predictable patterns. They took cover. They feared death. They could be outmaneuvered. these things didn't fear anything. A pack of them, he'd started thinking of them as infected for lack of a better term, had congregated around what looked like the remains of a street vendor's cart. They weren't feeding, not exactly, just present, existing in some horrible parody of their former lives. Statham gave them a wide berth, using a burned-out delivery truck as cover, moving with minimal sound. 15 rounds wouldn't last long if he had to shoot his way through every cluster between here and the police station. He was 2 blocks out when he heard the gunfire. Controlled bursts, professional spacing, the sound of people who knew how to fight. The muzzle flashes came from the upper windows of Raccoon City Police Department, a Gothic monstrosity that looked more like a museum than a functioning precinct. Statham watched as tracer rounds cut through the darkness, dropping infected in neat clusters. Whoever was up there had ammunition to spare and the discipline to make it count. The approach was the tricky part. The RPD's front entrance was blocked by an overturned SWAT van and at least 20 infected pressing against the barricade like moths against a light. The side entrance was no better. A solid mass of bodies, some in civilian clothes, others in the tattered remains of police uniforms. Statham circled the building, staying in the shadows, until he found what he was looking for. A fire escape on the east side, partially collapsed but still accessible from the roof of an adjacent building. He made the jump from a dumpster to a first-floor ledge, pulled himself up with the upper body strength that came from a lifetime of physical discipline, and was halfway up the fire escape when he heard the sound below. Not the moaning of the infected, but something else. Something that moved with purpose. The dog came around the corner at full sprint, and Statham's tactical mind immediately registered that it was wrong in the same way the people were wrong. Its skin was rotted in patches, exposing muscle and bone beneath. One eye was clouded white, the other missing entirely. But it moved fast, faster than the infected humans, and it had caught his scent. Statham didn't hesitate. He drew the Glock and put 2 rounds through the thing's skull as it leaped. The body crashed into the fire escape below him, already still. Dead things that wouldn't stay dead, and now dead dogs joining the party. The situation was deteriorating faster than any operation he'd ever been part of. The gunfire from above stopped. A voice called down, American accent, young but controlled. "Identify yourself. Are you infected?" "Do I look bloody infected?" Statham shouted back, already moving up the fire escape. "Name's Statham. I'm coming up. Don't shoot me." "Stop right there." A flashlight beam hit him directly in the face. Behind it, he could make out the silhouette of a rifle barrel. "How do we know you're not infected?" Statham kept his hands visible, Glock pointed at the sky. "Because infected don't generally have conversations. Now either let me in or I'll find another way. But those things down there are getting interested in all this noise, so I'd suggest we speed this along." There was a moment of tense silence, then the sound of metal scraping. A window opened and a hand reached out. Young, female, wearing a fingerless tactical glove. "Get in. Fast." He grabbed the offered hand and pulled himself through the window into what looked like a records room. The woman who'd helped him up was maybe 25. Wearing a police jacket over civilian clothes, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She kept her Beretta trained on him, with the kind of steady grip that spoke of recent and regular practice. "Against the wall," she ordered. "I need to check you for bites." "Love to comply," Statham said, spreading his arms. "But maybe after you tell me what the hell is happening in this city." "Outbreak," a new voice said from the doorway. This one was male, older, with the weathered look of a veteran cop. He carried a shotgun with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been using it all night. Some kind of virus turns people into those things. Raccoon City's been under quarantine for 6 hours, but it's too late. The whole city's gone. Statham submitted to the woman's inspection. She checked his arms, neck, legs, anywhere skin was exposed, looking for bite marks or scratches. He'd picked up a few cuts from the helicopter crash, but nothing that looked infected. She stepped back after a moment and lowered her weapon fractionally. "He's clean," she said. "I'm Catherine Morrison, RPD. This is Sergeant Doyle. We've got maybe 20 survivors barricaded in this building, but supplies are running low and those things just keep coming." Jason Statham. I was hired for an extraction job, supposed to pull someone out of the city before the quarantine went full lockdown. Helicopter went down near the Umbrella building. He holstered his Glock, reading the room. These were good people in a bad situation, running on fumes and fear. "Who's in charge?" "Nobody, really," Doyle said, leading them out into a hallway lit by emergency lighting. "Chief's dead. Most of the command staff didn't make it. We've got officers, civilians, couple of kids. We've been holding here waiting for extraction, but..." He gestured toward a window overlooking the street. The infected had multiplied, a sea of rotting faces and reaching hands pressing against every entrance. The main hall of the RPD had been converted into a makeshift fortress. Desks barricaded windows, ammunition was stacked in careful piles, and survivors huddled in clusters, some sleeping, others staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare Statham recognized from war zones. A woman clutched 2 children close, both of them too quiet for kids their age. An elderly man sat against the wall, methodically cleaning a hunting rifle. "Water?" Catherine offered, handing him a bottle. He nodded thanks and drank half of it in one go. The crash and the run had dehydrated him more than he'd realized. "What's the plan?" Statham asked, knowing from experience that asking was better than assuming command. These people had survived this long on their own. "Plan was to wait for the government to evacuate us," Doyle said bitterly. "That was 4 hours ago. Now the radio's saying nothing but emergency broadcasts telling people to shelter in place. Nobody's coming. Then we go to them." Statham moved to the window and studied the street below with a tactical eye. "How many vehicles do you have access to?" "2 squad cars in the garage, maybe a third of a tank between them. But there's no way through that." Catherine pointed at the infected mob. "We tried sending a car out 2 hours ago. They swarmed it before it made it 10 meters. Pulled the driver right through the window." Statham studied the crowd, looking for patterns. The infected moved in response to sound and light. He'd observed that much. They congregated in groups but didn't coordinate. No pack tactics, no strategy, just hunger and numbers. "What about underground? Service tunnels, sewers, anything like that?" Doyle and Catherine exchanged a look. "There's access to the sewer system from the basement," Doyle admitted, "but we sealed it off. Things were coming up from down there, not just infected people. Other things." "Other things," Statham repeated flatly. "Dogs like the one you shot, except bigger. And we heard something else down there, something that sounded like..." Catherine stopped, shaking her head. "You wouldn't believe me. Love, I just watched a dead cop walk and had to stomp its head in to make it stop. My threshold for belief has adjusted considerably in the last hour." Before anyone could respond, a sound echoed through the building. Not the moaning of infected, but a mechanical hum growing louder. Statham moved to the window. Above the city, cutting through the smoke, a helicopter was approaching. Not military, he noted. Civilian transport, corporate markings. The chopper didn't land. It hovered above the RPD and a loudspeaker crackled to life. Attention survivors. This is a priority extraction by the Umbrella Corporation. We are offering immediate evacuation to qualified personnel and assets. Prepare for... The transmission cut off as something massive and pale launched itself from a nearby building's roof, crashing into the helicopter's side. Statham caught a glimpse of it in the searchlight. Humanoid, but wrong. Grotesquely muscular, with exposed organs pulsing beneath translucent skin. The helicopter lurched, the pilot fought for control, and then the thing was inside the cabin, screaming, the sound of tearing metal. The helicopter spiraled down behind a building. The explosion lit up the night sky. That, Catherine said quietly, was what we heard in the sewers. Statham processed this information with the cold calculation that had kept him alive in situations where others had died. The infected were predictable, slow, manageable in small numbers. But if there were things out there that could bring down helicopters, things that moved with speed and purpose. Right, he said. New plan. We inventory every weapon, every round of ammunition, every useful piece of equipment in this building. Then we figure out exactly how many people can fight versus how many need protecting. And then we decide if we're waiting for rescue that might not come, or if we're taking our chances in hell. Doyle looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You military? Private sector. But I've been in worse situations than this. Have you really? Statham thought about the helicopter crash, the dead walking, the thing that had just torn through a civilian aircraft like tissue paper. No, he admitted. But I'm still breathing, which means the rules still apply. Adapt, improvise, survive. These things can be killed. So we kill them. Catherine managed a grim smile. You know what? I think I like you, Statham. Don't get attached, love. In my experience, people who like me tend to end up dead. He moved toward the armory door. Now show me what we're working with. If we're making a stand or making a run, I want to know exactly what we've got to work with. Outside, the moaning continued, an endless chorus of the damned pressing against the walls. But inside the RPD, for the first time since the outbreak began, the survivors had something they'd been missing. Someone who looked at the nightmare and saw a problem that could be solved with the right application of violence and tactical thinking. The infected had the numbers. But Jason Statham had 20 years of combat experience and absolutely no intention of dying in Ohio. The RPD armory was a mixed blessing. Plenty of weapons, but ammunition that wouldn't last a sustained firefight. Statham conducted inventory with the methodical precision of a man who'd learned that knowing exactly what you had often mattered more than what you wished you had. 6 shotguns, 8 Berettas, 3 MP5s, 2 hunting rifles from civilians who'd brought their own, and approximately 400 rounds total across all calibers. Not enough, he said bluntly, marking numbers on a scavenged notepad. 20 survivors. Maybe 100 infected outside right now, and God knows how many more in the city. We go loud, we die loud. Catherine leaned against the armory door, arms crossed. She ditched the police jacket, too restrictive for close quarters, and now wore just a tactical vest over a black t-shirt. So, what do you suggest? We can't just walk out there. No, but we can thin the herd. Statham moved to the window overlooking the front entrance. The infected had settled into an almost dormant state, swaying in place, waiting for stimulus. They respond to noise and light. We control those, we control them. Diversion, Doyle said, catching on. draw them away from the exits. More than that, we create a kill zone. Statham pointed to the intersection 60 meters north. Fire escapes on both sides, clear sight lines, elevated positions. We set up a sound source, car alarm, speaker system, doesn't matter. And when they congregate, 2 shooters with rifles take them down from above. Conserve ammunition, controlled shots, no wasted rounds. And while they're distracted, we move the civilians through the garage to the vehicles. The ones who can't fight get priority evacuation. The ones who can hold a gun stay behind to provide covering fire if it goes sideways. Catherine was already shaking her head. There's a problem with your plan. The kids, we've got 4 of them. The youngest is maybe 6 years old. You try to move them and they'll panic, make noise, attract attention. Statham had been in enough extractions to know she was right. Civilians under stress were unpredictable, children doubly so. Then we sedate them. You've got a medical kit? We're not drugging children, Catherine said flatly. Then you find another way to keep them quiet, because one scream brings that whole mob down on us. He met her eyes, refusing to soften it. I'm not being cruel, I'm being realistic. This is triage. We save who we can save, and we do it smart. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Doyle cleared his throat. There might be another option. The parking garage has a secondary exit that leads to the alley system. It's partially collapsed, but a small group could navigate it. We send the civilians that way with minimal escort, while the rest of us create the diversion up front. Splitting our forces, Statham said, considering it. Risky. Everything's risky, Catherine countered. But Doyle's right. We move as one big group. We're a target. Small teams, multiple routes, better odds someone makes it out. Before Statham could respond, a commotion erupted from the main hall. Voices raised in argument, someone shouting. The 3 of them moved quickly back to find a man in his 40s, wearing an Umbrella Corporation security uniform, standing in the center of a hostile circle of survivors. I'm telling you, there's a way out, the man was saying, hands raised defensively. Umbrella has emergency protocols. There's an underground facility beneath the hospital. Umbrella's the reason we're in this mess, someone shouted back. The security officer, his name tag read Chen, shook his head desperately. I don't know anything about that. I'm just saying there's an evacuation point. Medical personnel, security staff, essential personnel. They're gathering there now. There's transportation out of the city. Statham pushed through the crowd. You, Umbrella? Chen turned, relief washing over his face at seeing someone who looked like they might actually listen. Security detail. I was supposed to escort company executives to the evacuation point, but they... He swallowed hard. They didn't make it. I barely got out myself. And you came here why? Because I saw your lights, saw people were alive. I thought... Chen's voice cracked slightly. I thought maybe I could help. I have access codes, knowledge of the facility layout. I can get people to safety. Mighty convenient, Doyle said. Shotgun not quite pointed at Chen, but ready enough. Umbrella just happens to have a way out, and you just happen to show up offering to lead us there. It's not convenient, it's protocol. Chen pulled out a laminated card from his pocket, an Umbrella security badge with clearance codes. Look, I get that you don't trust the company. Hell, after tonight, I don't either. But that facility is our best shot. It's fortified, it has supplies, and it has transport. Statham took the badge, examined it. The holographic seal looked legitimate, and the photo matched the man in front of him. This underground facility, what's it for? Research, Chen admitted. I don't know the specifics. I'm security, not science. But it's built to containment protocols, sealed environment, independent power, multiple fail-safes. A research facility, Catherine repeated slowly. Researching what, exactly? Chen met her eyes. I think you already know. The implication hung in the air. An umbrella research facility beneath a city now consumed by infection. Either the source of the outbreak or a symptom of it. Either way, walking into an umbrella installation felt like volunteering to be a lab rat. How many people can this facility evacuate? Statham asked. The transport hub can handle up to 50 at a time. Helicopter pads on the surface, armored vehicles in the motor pool. And you're offering this out of the goodness of your heart? Chen's laugh was bitter. I'm offering it because I don't want to die alone in this city. You help me get there, I help you get out. Simple transaction. Statham looked at Doyle, then Catherine. Both wore expressions of deep suspicion, and he couldn't blame them. Everything about this screamed trap, but everything about staying in the RPD screamed slow death by attrition. Where is this facility? He asked. Beneath Raccoon General Hospital, maybe 2 kilometers from here. Chen pulled out a crumpled map, spreading it on a nearby desk. We'd have to go through the downtown area, heaviest concentration of infected. But there are service tunnels we can use for part of the route. The same tunnels where we heard those things? Catherine said. The ones we sealed off because something was hunting down there? The tunnels are extensive. We avoid the compromised sections, stick to the main routes. Chen traced a path with his finger. It's dangerous, but it's faster than surface streets and provides cover. Statham studied the map, his tactical mind already running scenarios. 2 kilometers through infected territory with 20 civilians, minimal ammunition, and unknown threats in the tunnels. Against that, the RPD's defenses would eventually be overwhelmed. It was just a matter of time. We put it to a vote, he said finally. Everyone here has a right to decide. Stay and hold the RPD, hoping government evacuation arrives. Or take Chen's offer and try for the umbrella facility. You trust him? Doyle asked quietly. I don't trust anyone I haven't bled with, Statham replied. But I trust that staying here gets us killed eventually. At least this gives us a chance. The vote took 20 minutes and broke along predictable lines. The civilians wanted out, desperate for any promise of safety. Some of the officers wanted to hold position, following protocol even as the world fell apart. In the end, 15 voted to attempt the facility, 5 to stay. Catherine approached those who'd chosen to remain. You're sure? An older officer, badge identifying him as Reynolds, nodded. Someone needs to stay. Keep the lights on in case other survivors show up. We'll hold here as long as we can. It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. But Statham respected the choice. Some men needed to go down fighting in a position of their own choosing. He'd known plenty of them over the years. Right then, he said, addressing the group that would attempt the evacuation. We leave in 30 minutes. Travel light, weapons, water, medical supplies only. No personal effects, no sentiment. Chen leads us to the tunnel access. I take point, Doyle covers rear, Catherine manages the civilians. We move quiet, we move fast, and we do not stop for anything. Questions? A woman holding a young girl raised her hand tentatively. What if someone gets bitten? The room went silent. Everyone had been thinking it, but she'd been brave enough to ask. Statham didn't sugarcoat it. If someone gets bitten, they're infected. We've all seen what that means. We can't risk bringing infection into a group of survivors in close quarters. So we just leave them. The woman's voice shook. We make it quick and painless, Statham said quietly. It's more mercy than they'd get turning into one of those things. Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, but Doyle put a hand on her shoulder. They both knew he was right, even if it was a brutal truth to voice. Chen cleared his throat. The facility has medical resources. If someone's bitten but the infection hasn't fully taken hold, there might be treatment options. Might be? Statham said skeptically. I've heard rumors, antiviral protocols. I can't promise anything, but it's hope, the woman said, clutching her daughter tighter. That's more than we have here. Statham nodded slowly. Another variable, another uncertainty. But if it kept people from panicking at the first sign of injury, it was worth the lie. Then we move fast enough that infection doesn't have time to spread. 30 minutes. Get ready. As the group dispersed to gather supplies, Catherine pulled Statham aside. You really think this facility exists? I think Chen believes it exists, which isn't quite the same thing. Statham checked his Glock's magazine for the 4th time, a habit more than necessity. But I also think staying here guarantees death. At least this way we're taking action. You're good at this, she observed. Taking command, making the hard calls. I've had practice. He slid the magazine home with a decisive click. Spent 20 years making sure other people survive situations they had no business walking into. Extractions, security details, worst places on Earth. This is just another job. Is it, though? Catherine gestured toward the main hall where civilians were saying quiet goodbyes to those staying behind. These aren't clients. You're not getting paid. Statham was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted. But I'm here, and they need someone who knows how to navigate hell. So that's what I'll be. Chen appeared in the doorway. Tunnel access is through the basement. I've got the security codes to unlock the maintenance entrance. Once we're in the system, it's a straight shot most of the way. Most of the way, Statham repeated. What's the rest of the way? There's a section where tunnel collapse forced a detour through the old subway station. We'll be exposed there, open platform, lots of access points. If infected are in the system, then we handle it. Statham turned to address the group. Listen up. We move in a column, no stragglers. Maintain visual contact with person ahead and behind. If someone falls, we make the call whether to help or keep moving. I know that sounds harsh, but 15 people have a better chance than none. Are we clear? Murmurs of agreement, some more certain than others. Doyle distributed ammunition, 2 magazines per person who could shoot, with the remainder held in reserve. Catherine organized the civilians by mobility, the fastest and most capable near the front and back, those needing assistance in the middle. Statham performed one final check of his gear. Glock 17, 3 magazines, tactical knife, flashlight, and a Beretta taken from the armory as backup. Not an arsenal, but enough to work with. Reynolds approached as they prepared to descend. You get them out, yeah? I'll do my best, Statham said, offering his hand. Reynolds shook it firmly. That's all anyone can ask. The basement stairs descended into darkness that the emergency lighting didn't quite penetrate. Chen led the way, using a key card to access a heavy steel door marked Maintenance Personnel Only. Beyond it, the tunnel stretched away into absolute blackness, the air thick with the smell of mold and sewage. Statham clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. Behind him, 14 other lights joined his. a constellation of hope descending into the underground arteries of a dying city. "Stay close," he ordered. "Stay quiet. And whatever you hear in the dark, don't stop moving." The doors sealed behind them with a hydraulic hiss, cutting off the last light from the world above. Ahead, the tunnel waited, and with it, the unknown horrors that Umbrella had buried beneath Raccoon City. But Jason Statham had spent his life walking into dark places. He'd survived them all by being harder, faster, and more willing to do what was necessary than anything that waited in the shadows. The infected had their city. He was going to take his people through it anyway. The tunnels were a claustrophobic nightmare of rust-stained concrete and dripping pipes, each sound magnified and distorted until Statham couldn't tell if the scraping echoes were rats, water, or something worse. Chen led them through the maintenance passages with the confidence of someone who'd walked these routes before. His flashlight beam steady as he navigated intersections marked only by faded alphanumeric codes. They'd been underground for 20 minutes when the first test came. A junction ahead branched 3 ways, left toward the subway detour Chen had mentioned, straight toward what the faded signage indicated was a pumping station, and right into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. Chen stopped, consulting a laminated map pulled from his vest. "Subway's faster," he said, "but more exposed. Pumping station route adds 30 minutes, but keeps us in sealed tunnels most of the way." "What's to the right?" Statham asked, though something in his gut already told him he didn't want to know. "Old access tunnel to the Umbrella Research Annex. Supposed to be sealed, but..." Chen's flashlight caught something on the right-hand tunnel wall. Scratch marks, deep gouges in the concrete, at a height that suggested something large and powerful had clawed its way through. "We take the subway," Statham decided. The extra exposure was worth avoiding, whatever had made those marks. Catherine moved up beside him as they turned left. "You see those scratches? Hard to miss. Same pattern as what we found in the RPD sewers, right before we sealed that section off." Her voice was tight. "These things, they're not just in the city. They're everywhere underneath it." The subway platform emerged from the tunnel like the mouth of a cathedral, vast and echoing, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly amber, and the platform was empty except for abandoned luggage and dark stains that might have been oil or might have been something worse. Chen held up a fist, signaling halt. The group bunched up behind Statham, flashlights sweeping the platform. Across the tracks, 3 more tunnel openings led deeper into the system. The electronic departure board still flickered weakly, displaying train times that would never be met. "Clear so far," Doyle whispered from the rear. "But I don't like how exposed we are." Statham didn't like it either. The platform offered too many angles of attack. Too many shadows for infected to hide in. His tactical sense was screaming ambush, but there was no alternative route that wouldn't cost them hours they didn't have. "Quickly and quietly across the platform," he ordered. "Chen, which tunnel?" "Far right. It connects to the hospital sub-basement in about half a kilometer." They moved as a column, boots scuffing on tile that was slick with something viscous. Statham kept his Glock up, scanning for movement. Halfway across the platform, his flashlight beam caught something that made him freeze. A body. Fresh, not one of the rotted infected. A man in an Umbrella tactical uniform, sprawled face down in an expanding pool of blood that was still wet. Next to him, a military-grade assault rifle, an M4 with an undermount grenade launcher. "Hold," Statham said quietly, kneeling beside the corpse. Entry wound in the back of the skull, exit wound that had taken most of the face. Execution style, point-blank range. The man had been running from something, and someone had put him down. Jesus, Catherine breathed. How long ago? Statham touched the blood, still warm. Minutes, maybe less. He grabbed the M4, checking the magazine. Full load, 30 rounds, plus 3 more magazines on the dead man's tactical vest. He stripped the gear quickly, efficiently, adding it to his own kit. "We need to move," Chen said urgently. "If whoever did this is still..." The sound came from above, a wet, heavy impact like a side of beef hitting pavement. All flashlights swung up to catch something massive dropping from the ceiling girders. It landed in a crouch between their group and the exit tunnel, and when it rose to its full height, Statham got his first clear look at what had brought down the helicopter. The thing stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a grotesque parody of human musculature. Skin was translucent in patches, showing pulsing organs and coiled intestines beneath. One arm ended in normal fingers, the other had elongated into a massive claw with talons like railroad spikes. Its face, if it still had one, was a mass of exposed bone and muscle tissue, with one eye bulging obscenely from a socket that had split open to accommodate it. "Tyrant," Chen whispered, the word barely audible. "Oh God, it's a tyrant." The creature's head swiveled toward the sound, that grotesque eye fixing on Chen with horrible intelligence. Then it charged. Statham had faced down hardened killers, fought in close quarters where hesitation meant death. But he'd never seen anything move that fast at that size. The tyrant covered 15 meters in 3 strides, its massive claws sweeping in an arc that would have decapitated Chen if Statham hadn't tackled him aside. "Scatter, don't cluster!" Statham's training kicked in automatically. Concentrated targets made easy kills. The group broke in multiple directions as the tyrant's claws smashed through the space where they'd been standing, pulverizing tile. Doyle opened fire with his shotgun, buckshot tearing into the creature's torso. The tyrant barely registered the impacts, flesh tearing but no blood flowing. Whatever this thing was, conventional physiology didn't apply. It backhanded Doyle with its normal hand, sending the sergeant flying into a support column hard enough to crack concrete. "Aim for the head." Catherine was firing her Beretta in controlled pairs, rounds sparking off the tyrant's skull but not penetrating. The thing's bone structure had been reinforced somehow, armored against small arms fire. Statham brought up the M4, flipped the selector to semi-auto, and put 3 rounds into the tyrant's eye. The creature recoiled, bellowing, a sound like tearing metal mixed with a human scream. Dark fluid leaked from the ruined eye socket, and for a moment, Statham thought they'd found the kill shot. Then the tyrant's remaining eye fixed on him with pure hatred, and it charged again. He dove behind a concrete support pillar as the claw punched through where he'd been standing. The M4 came up, and he fired on full automatic now, emptying the magazine into the creature's exposed organs. Something ruptured. Maybe a lung, maybe something worse, and the tyrant staggered. "The heart!" Chen was shouting from somewhere to Statham's left. "The heart's exposed on the right side. Target the heart." Statham saw it then, a pulsing mass of muscle visible through the translucent patches of skin, beating with horrible vitality on the tyrant's right flank. He dropped the empty M4, drew the Glock, and moved. The creature was still reeling from the automatic fire, temporarily disoriented. Statham sprinted in low, came up inside the reach of that massive claw, and emptied his magazine point blank into the exposed heart. Each round punched through with meaty impacts, and the tyrant's movements became spasmodic, uncoordinated. But it wasn't dead. The claw swept down in a last desperate strike, and Statham threw himself backward, feeling the air displacement as talons passed centimeters from his chest. He hit the ground rolling, came up empty-handed, both guns dry, and reached for the tactical knife on his belt. The tyrant was dying, but refused to accept it. It lurched toward him on legs that barely functioned, that horrible eye still locked on target. Statham could see Catherine and others firing, trying to drop it. But the thing's physiology was too alien, too resistant. Fine. If bullets wouldn't finish it, he'd use something else. The grenade launcher mounted under the M4. He dropped the rifle when the magazine ran dry, but it was there, 5 meters away, loaded and ready. Statham dove for it as the tyrant's claw came down again, grabbed the weapon, thumbed the grenade launcher's trigger, and fired from a prone position. The 40mm grenade hit the tyrant's center mass at point-blank range. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, a pressure wave that Statham felt in his bones. When the smoke cleared, the tyrant was down, its torso a crater of ruined flesh and shattered bone. This time, it didn't get up. Statham climbed to his feet, ears ringing, and conducted a quick head count. Doyle was conscious, but barely, Catherine helping him up. 2 civilians had injuries, cuts from flying debris, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Everyone else was shaken, but mobile. "Everyone intact?" he called out. Shaky acknowledgments came back. "Chen, talk to me. What the hell was that thing?" Chen was pale, hands trembling as he retrieved his flashlight. Tyrant-class bioorganic weapon, Umbrella's ultimate combat model. I'd only seen files, training videos. I didn't think they'd actually... He looked at the corpse, at the devastation it had caused in less than a minute. There were supposed to be fail-safes, containment protocols. Well, they bloody failed, Statham said, reloading his Glock with his last fresh magazine. Are there more? I don't know. The files said they were prototypes, limited production. But if one got loose... Catherine helped Doyle toward them. The sergeant's face was a mask of blood from a scalp wound, but he was steady on his feet. "We need to keep moving," she said. "That thing makes noise. It'll attract every infected in the tunnel system." She was, continued 22, 18 right. Already Statham could hear the distant moaning echoing through the subway tunnels, growing louder. The infected were shambling toward the sound of combat like moths to flame. "Doyle, can you walk?" Statham asked. "I can run if I have to," the sergeant replied through gritted teeth. "Good, because we're about to." Statham turned to Chen. "How far to the facility?" 400 meters, straight shot from here. "Then we run. No stops, no fighting unless absolutely necessary. Move." They ran through tunnels that seemed to press in from all sides, flashlight beams bouncing wildly off curved walls. Behind them, the moaning grew louder, punctuated by the shuffle drag of feet that had forgotten how to properly walk. Statham set the pace, fast enough to put distance between them and pursuit, controlled enough that the civilians could keep up. Chen led them to a reinforced blast door marked with Umbrella's distinctive red and white logo. He swiped his keycard through a reader that somehow still had power, punched in a code, and the door began to cycle open with a pneumatic hiss. "Inside. Everyone inside." Statham positioned himself at the door, M4 up, covering their retreat. The first infected rounded the corner 50 meters back, then more, then a flood of them, stumbling and lurching forward with arms outstretched. The last civilian made it through. Catherine pulled Doyle across the threshold. Chen was shouting something about pressure seals and containment. Statham backed through the doorway, fired a controlled burst that dropped the lead infected, then slapped the emergency close button. The blast door slammed shut with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Through the reinforced window, Statham watched infected slam against the barrier, clawing uselessly at steel designed to contain biohazards. They were in. The corridor beyond was antiseptically clean. Fluorescent lighting humming overhead, air noticeably cooler and drier than the tunnels. Umbrella logos marked every surface. Walls, floor, even the ceiling. It looked less like a research facility and more like the sterile interior of a spacecraft. Chen moved to an intercom panel on the wall, pressed a button. "This is Security Officer Chen. Clearance code Delta 779er. I have civilians requiring immediate evacuation. Please respond." Static. Then a voice, female, professional. "Clearance confirmed. Proceed to decontamination on level 2. Medical screening required before facility access." The intercom clicked off. Chen turned to the group with visible relief. "We made it. They'll process us through medical, get us cleaned up, and then we can access the evacuation transport." Statham kept his weapon ready, his instincts still screaming warnings. Just like that. We show up with 15 people and they just evacuate us? That's the protocol, Chen insisted. Umbrella takes care of its people. "Chen?" Catherine said slowly. "We're not Umbrella people." The security officer's expression flickered, just for a second, just enough. "No," he admitted. "But I am, and I'm vouching for you. That's enough." It wasn't. Statham could feel it in his bones, the same sensation he'd had walking into ambushes, into traps disguised as opportunities. But they were inside now, the infected locked out, and their options had narrowed to a single point: forward. "All right," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We go through decontamination, we get medical clearance, and we get on whatever transport they're offering. But nobody separates from the group. Nobody goes anywhere alone, and if something feels wrong, we react immediately. Are we clear?" Nods all around, though he could see the exhaustion setting in. They'd survived the tunnels, survived the tyrant, made it to the promised evacuation point. The civilians wanted to believe they were safe. Statham knew better. In his experience, walking into a facility run by the corporation responsible for turning an entire city into a graveyard wasn't salvation. It was just a different kind of danger. "Lead the way, Chen," he said, gesturing with the M4. "And remember, I'll be right behind you." Chen nodded and started down the corridor. The group followed, their footsteps echoing in sterile halls, while behind them, beyond the sealed door, the infected continued their endless scratching at barriers they would never breach. Umbrella had promised evacuation. Statham intended to hold them to it, one way or another. Decontamination was a nightmare of chemical showers and UV exposure that left everyone's skin raw and eyes burning. Statham endured it with the patience of someone who'd been through worse. He'd been tear-gassed in Prague, exposed to CS agents in Mogadishu, survived nerve agent scares in Damascus. This was uncomfortable but not lethal, which put it in the acceptable range. What wasn't acceptable was the way Umbrella Security had confiscated their weapons. "Standard protocol," the guard had said. A man built like a brick wall wearing tactical armor that looked military-grade. "No unauthorized firearms in the facility. You'll get them back when you board transport." Statham had considered refusing, considered the dozen ways he could disarm the guard and reclaim his gear. But Catherine had caught his eye and shaken her head slightly. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and in Umbrella's house. Starting a fight now would get people killed. So he'd surrendered the M4, the Glock, even his tactical knife. watching as they were logged and tagged. But he'd kept the small ceramic blade tucked in his boot. They'd patted him down, but not thoroughly enough. And old habits from smuggling operations in Bangkok had taught him where security searches always missed. The medical screening took place in a sterile examination room that smelled of disinfectant and something else. Something organic and wrong that the chemicals couldn't quite mask. A doctor who introduced herself as Dr. Elizabeth Ramos checked each survivor methodically. Temperature, blood pressure, visual inspection for bite marks or scratches. "You're remarkably intact," she observed, examining Statham's various cuts and bruises from the helicopter crash. "Most people who've been topside during the outbreak show more trauma." "I'm good at not getting bitten," Statham replied evenly. Dr. Ramos smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "So, it seems." She drew blood from his arm, ostensibly for infection screening, and labeled the vial with his name and a series of alphanumeric codes he didn't recognize. "You can wait in the holding area. We'll process everyone and arrange transport within the hour." The holding area was a converted conference room with umbrella promotional materials still on the walls. Glossy posters showing smiling scientists and slogans about preserving life through science. 20 chairs arranged in neat rows, a water cooler in the corner, and exactly one exit with a magnetic lock controlled from outside. "This feel wrong to anyone else?" Doyle muttered, pressing an ice pack to his head wound. The medical team had cleaned and bandaged it, but he still looked like he'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight. "Everything about this feels wrong," Catherine agreed quietly. She was watching the door, the same tactical alertness Statham recognized from fellow operators. "We're locked in, disarmed. They've taken blood samples. This isn't evacuation protocol. This is intake." One of the civilians, the woman with the young daughter, turned toward them with frightened eyes. "What do you mean, intake?" Before Catherine could answer, Chen entered through the magnetically sealed door, now wearing a fresh umbrella uniform. He looked cleaner, more composed, but there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Good news," he announced, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Transport is being arranged, but there's been a complication." "What kind of complication?" Statham asked, standing slowly. The ceramic blade in his boot suddenly felt very important. "The facility director wants to speak with you specifically. Dr. William Birkin. He's the head of viral research here." Chen wouldn't quite meet Statham's eyes. "He's interested in your group's survival rate. Apparently, it's statistically unusual for this many people to make it through the outbreak zone without infection." "We were careful," Catherine said. "Extremely careful," Chen agreed. "Too careful, Dr. Birkin thinks. He wants to understand how. It could help develop better survival protocols for other civilian populations." It was a reasonable explanation. It was also complete bollocks, and everyone in the room knew it. "And if I refuse this meeting?" Statham asked. Chen's expression hardened slightly. "Then evacuation gets delayed while Dr. Birkin investigates anyway. This way is faster. You talk to him, answer some questions, and we all get on the helicopter within 2 hours." Statham studied the security officer, reading micro-expressions and body language the way he'd learned to read enemy combatants. Chen was scared, genuinely terrified of something, and trying very hard to hide it. He was following orders he didn't agree with, caught between multiple bad options. "I'll meet with him," Statham said. "But my people stay together, in this room, and if I'm not back in 30 minutes, they start making noise about unlawful detention." "That's acceptable." Chen's relief was palpable. "Follow me. The rest of you, please remain here. Medical staff will bring food and water shortly. Catherine stood. I'm going with him. That's not negotiable. She cut Chen off. He goes, I go. You want cooperation. That's the price. Chen looked ready to argue, then seemed to decide it wasn't worth the fight. Fine, both of you. The rest stay here. They followed Chen through corridors that grew progressively more industrial, the corporate veneer giving way to exposed pipes and reinforced blast doors. This was the real facility, the parts they didn't show in promotional videos. Labs lined one corridor, visible through reinforced glass windows, equipment inside dark and abandoned. In one room, something that might have been experiment cages sat empty, doors hanging open. Where is everyone? Catherine asked. A facility this size should have staff. Evacuated already, Chen said. Essential personnel only remaining. Dr. Birkin's team is wrapping up critical research before final withdrawal. Critical research, Statham repeated. In the middle of a citywide outbreak caused by that same research. Chen's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. They descended 3 levels via an industrial elevator that required Chen's keycard and retinal scan. When the doors opened, they emerged into a laboratory complex that was definitely still operational. Scientists in containment suits moved between workstations. Computer terminals displayed data streams, and in sealed chambers visible through observation windows, test subjects, infected, clawed at barriers. A man in his late 30s wearing a lab coat approached, clipboard in hand, and the confident posture of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His name tag read, Dr. William Birkin, Chief Researcher. Ah, our remarkable survivors, Birkin said, extending a hand that neither Statham nor Catherine shook. He withdrew it without apparent offense. Forgive my directness, but I'm fascinated by your intact status. According to Chen's report, you encountered a TO2 Tyrant unit and survived. That's unprecedented for civilians. We got lucky, Statham said flatly. Luck. Birkin smiled. I don't believe in luck, Mr. Statham. I believe in variables, in biological imperatives, in evolutionary advantages. He gestured toward the observation windows. The T-virus has a 98% infection rate through fluid transmission, yet your group shows 0 infections despite extended exposure. That suggests either extraordinary caution or something more interesting. Perhaps a natural immunity factor. You took our blood, Catherine said. You'll have your answers soon enough. Oh, the blood tests will take hours. I was hoping for something more immediate. Birkin moved to a computer terminal, pulled up files. I'm offering you a deal. You provide detailed accounts of your exposure timeline, survival methods, and any unusual physiological responses. In exchange, I guarantee immediate evacuation, not just for you, but for all your people. Helicopter on the pad within 30 minutes. And if we refuse? Statham asked. Then you wait for standard processing. Could be hours, could be days, depending on how backed up our evacuation queue becomes. Birkin's smile didn't waver. But I'm a reasonable man. I know you want out of Raccoon City. I'm offering the fastest route. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat, and Statham had heard variations of it from warlords, corrupt officials, and corporate fixers across 3 continents. The subtext was always the same: cooperate or suffer consequences. What's the real reason you want this information? He asked. Because survival protocols for civilians is a nice cover story. But we both know that's not why the head of viral research personally interviews survivors. Birkin's smile widened, genuine this time. Smart. Chen said you were sharp. He pulled up a new file on the terminal, and Statham saw genetic sequences, viral models, mathematical projections he didn't fully understand. The truth? I'm developing something beyond the T-virus, something better, more controlled. But I need data on human resistance factors, on the rare individuals who might possess natural countermeasures. Your group's survival suggests variables I need to account for. So we're test subjects, Catherine said. Your data points, Birkin corrected. Voluntary ones if you cooperate, involuntary ones if you don't. Either way, I get what I need. But cooperation makes everyone's life easier. Statham had been in enough coercive situations to recognize when he was truly trapped. They were 3 levels underground in a facility controlled by a man who viewed human life as experimental material, even if he could take Birkin down, which was questionable given the armed security visible in the background. It wouldn't get his people out. 1 hour of questions, he said. We answer honestly. You put us on that helicopter. All of us. No exceptions, no delays. Deal. Birkin pulled out a recording device. Let's start with the tunnel encounter. The T-002 has a documented kill rate of 100% against non-military personnel. How exactly did you survive it? For the next 45 minutes, Statham walked Birkin through the encounter. The tactics used, the weapons employed, the discovery of the exposed heart as a weak point. Catherine added details about the infected behavior patterns they'd observed, the way sound and light attracted them, their apparent inability to problem-solve beyond basic obstacles. Birkin absorbed it all with the enthusiasm of a man receiving Christmas presents, making notes, asking follow-up questions, occasionally muttering to himself about adaptive countermeasures and enhanced neural preservation. Fascinating, he said finally. Your tactical approach was sound, but what really interests me is your autonomic responses. No panic, minimal stress indicators according to Chen's observations, optimal decision-making under pressure. That suggests either extensive prior combat experience or... An alarm cut him off. Red lights began flashing throughout the laboratory, and a computerized voice announced, "Containment breach, Sector D. All personnel implement emergency protocols." Birkin's expression shifted from curiosity to fury in an instant. "What sector?" he demanded, pulling up security feeds on his terminal. The screen showed chaos. In what looked like a lower-level containment area, something had smashed through reinforced barriers. Infected were pouring into corridors, overwhelming security teams. But worse than the infected were the other things, creatures that Statham recognized from the tunnels. Tyrant-class bioweapons, multiple units, tearing through personnel with systematic efficiency. "Impossible," Birkin breathed. "Those units are in stasis. They can't just..." Another screen showed the cause. A figure in tactical gear moving through the containment area, deliberately releasing specimens, sabotaging systems. The video quality was poor, but Statham caught a glimpse of the saboteur's face, female, Asian, professional operator. "Corporate espionage," Chen said, horror dawning in his voice. "Someone's stealing specimens." "Not just stealing," Birkin snarled. "They're releasing everything. The entire facility's going to be overrun in minutes." He spun toward Statham and Catherine. "Your evacuation deal just became mutual survival. Help me secure my research data and get to the surface, or we all die down here." "Our people," Catherine said immediately. "The holding room is already compromised." Birkin pulled up another camera feed, showing infected filtering through ventilation systems, heading toward the upper levels. If they're not armed and mobile in the next 3 minutes, they're dead. Statham was already moving toward the door. Chen, you know the facility layout. Fastest route to the holding area. Service elevator, but it requires... I don't care what it requires. Move. They ran through corridors that were rapidly transforming from sterile research facility to abattoir. Emergency shutters were slamming down, automated defenses activating, and somewhere distant, screaming echoed through ventilation shafts. Birkin kept pace despite his researcher's build, clutching a briefcase that apparently contained data worth dying for. The service elevator was guarded by 2 security officers who had their rifles trained on a side corridor where infected were visible in the distance. Chen's keycard got them access, and all 5 of them crammed into the elevator as the doors closed just ahead of the first wave of infected. Holding area level 1, Chen gasped, hitting buttons. The elevator began to rise with agonizing slowness. Statham turned to Birkin. You said mutual survival. That means you arm us. Now. Birkin looked ready to argue, then seemed to accept reality. He pulled a keycard from his pocket and handed it to Chen. Armory, level 2. Issue them whatever they need. The elevator stopped at level 2. The doors opened onto a corridor that was clear for now. Chen led them at a run to a reinforced door marked Security Arsenal, authorized personnel only. The keycard granted access to a room that made Statham's earlier weapon assessment of the RPD look like a toy collection. Military-grade firearms lined the walls. MP5 submachine guns, SPAS-12 combat shotguns, M4 carbines with full auto capability. Even a few exotic weapons he recognized from Special Forces catalogs. Ammunition was stacked in organized crates, along with fragmentation grenades, flashbangs, and body armor. Take what you need, Chen said, already grabbing an MP5 and loading magazines. Statham didn't need to be told twice. He selected an M4 with an ACOG scope, loaded 4 magazines, grabbed a tactical vest, and added a SPAS-12 as backup. Catherine armed herself with similar efficiency, and even Birkin reluctantly accepted a pistol. Now the holding room, Statham said, checking the M4's action. And if any of our people are dead because of your bloody containment breach, the deal's off and you're on your own. Birkin's expression suggested he understood the threat wasn't idle. They took the stairs to level 1, faster than waiting for the elevator again. The corridor leading to the holding area showed signs of recent combat. Bullet holes in walls, blood smears, spent brass casings. But no bodies, infected or otherwise. The holding room door was open, hanging crooked on damaged hinges. Inside, the civilians had barricaded themselves behind overturned tables. Doyle stood at the makeshift barrier with a fire axe he'd apparently torn off the wall, ready to brain anything that came through the door. About bloody time, the sergeant said, lowering the axe when he recognized them. We've got infected in the ventilation system and some kind of alarm saying the facility's compromised. What the hell's happening? Umbrella's about to become a mass grave, Statham said, tossing him an MP5 from Catherine's loadout. We're evacuating now, all of us, and shooting anything that gets in our way. The woman with the young daughter looked at the weapons with naked fear. I thought we were safe here. Nowhere safe, Statham told her, not unkindly. But I'm getting you out anyway. Stay behind me, do exactly what I say, and we might all survive this. Birkin was already at a wall terminal, pulling up facility schematics. The helicopter pad is on the roof, 3 levels up. But the main stairwell is compromised. Cameras show infected flooding the route. We'll need to use the emergency access shaft in the research wing. Lead the way, Statham ordered. And doctor, if this is another trap, I'll feed you to your own experiments. Birkin met his eyes, and Statham saw genuine fear there. Not of him, but of something else. Something the researcher knew was loose in his facility. "No trap," Birkin said quietly. "Just the consequences of playing God without adequate containment protocols." They moved out, a column of armed operators and terrified civilians, heading toward a rooftop extraction point with an entire facility of bioweapons between them and freedom. And somewhere in the chaos, a corporate saboteur was still operating, releasing specimens and destabilizing systems with methodical precision. Raccoon City was dying above them. The Umbrella facility was dying around them. But Jason Statham had made a promise to get these people out, and he'd survived this long by being too stubborn to break his word. The infected would learn what the world's worst men had already discovered. When Statham committed to something, hell itself had to take a number and wait its turn. The research wing was a horror show of broken containment and escaped nightmares. Through reinforced glass windows, Statham watched things that had once been human test subjects claw at barriers, their bodies twisted by viral mutations into configurations that defied anatomy. Some had elongated limbs that bent at impossible angles. Others had tumorous growths pulsing with unnatural life. One creature was nothing but a torso with a grotesquely oversized head, dragging itself across its cell floor with the arms that had fused into bone-bladed appendages. "Don't look," he told the civilians, but he knew some already had. The young girl was crying silently into her mother's shoulder, and he didn't blame her. Birkin navigated the wing with the grim familiarity of a man touring his own sins. "The emergency shaft is past the T-virus testing chambers. We'll need to move fast. Some of these containment cells are on backup power and failing." As if summoned by his words, a crack echoed through the corridor. One of the reinforced windows shattered outward, and the creature with blade arms launched itself through the gap with horrifying speed. It landed in the middle of their group, screeching, a sound like metal scraping across bone. Statham didn't hesitate. The M4 came up, and he put a 3-round burst through the thing's oversized head. It dropped, twitched once, and went still. Brain death still worked, even on Umbrella's mutations. "Keep moving," he ordered, but already more cells were failing. The backup power Birkin had mentioned was clearly on its last legs. All around them, containment was breaking down in slow motion. They ran through a nightmare gallery of biological horrors, each cell holding something worse than the last. Catherine stayed close to the civilians, keeping them moving, while Doyle covered the rear with his MP5. Chen looked increasingly haunted, seeing firsthand what his employer had created in these underground chambers. The emergency access shaft was a vertical tunnel with an industrial ladder, dimly lit by emergency lighting. Birkin opened it with another keycard swipe, revealing a climb that disappeared into darkness above. 3 levels, he said. The shaft opens onto the helipad level. There should be at least 1 helicopter fueled and ready. Standard evacuation protocol. "Should be," Statham repeated skeptically. "You lot seem to have a lot of protocols that aren't worth the paper they're printed on." A roar echoed from somewhere behind them, deep, resonant, nothing like the wet moans of standard infected. Statham recognized it instantly. Another tyrant. "Everyone up the ladder, now." He positioned himself at the base, M4 trained on the corridor they'd just traversed. "Catherine, you're on point. Get them topside." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Move." She didn't waste time arguing, just started herding civilians onto the ladder. The young girl went first, her mother right behind. Then the elderly man with the hunting rifle, then others in quick succession. Doyle stayed at the ladder's base with Statham, both of them covering the approach. The tyrant appeared at the corridor's far end, and Statham's tactical assessment immediately flagged it as different from the subway specimen. This one was larger, more heavily muscled, and both arms had developed into massive claws. Its face was barely recognizable as having ever been human, just a mass of bone plating and exposed muscle tissue. T-103 model, Birkin said from halfway up the ladder, apparently unable to help himself even now. Enhanced combat variant, significantly more durable than— "Shut up and climb," Statham snapped. The tyrant charged, covering the distance with terrifying speed. Statham opened fire, controlled bursts aimed at joints and soft tissue, trying to slow it rather than kill it outright. Rounds sparked off bone plating, and the few that penetrated barely seemed to register. Doyle fired his MP5 in controlled pairs, hitting the thing's legs. One knee buckled slightly, something damaged in the joint, and the tyrant's charge became a lurching run, still fast enough to close the distance in seconds. "Go!" Statham grabbed Doyle and physically pushed him toward the ladder. The sergeant went, smart enough to recognize when retreat was the only option. Statham fired a final burst, then followed, boots hitting ladder rungs just as the tyrant crashed into the shaft entrance below. The creature looked up at them with alien intelligence, then began to climb. Its claws scraped against metal, gouging deep furrows but providing purchase. It ascended with the inevitability of a natural disaster. Above, civilians were screaming, panic setting in. Statham climbed faster, the M4 slung across his back, using just his hands and core strength to power upward. Below, the tyrant gained ground, moving with a horrible determination. One level up, 2 levels. The shaft seemed to stretch forever, each rung an eternity. Statham could hear the tyrant's breathing now, a wet, ragged sound that spoke of damaged lungs still somehow functioning. Catherine's voice from above. "We're at the top. Hatch is opening." Daylight flooded down the shaft. Actual daylight, gray and smoke-hazed but real. The promise of escape pushed Statham faster. His arms burned, muscles screaming protest. But he'd endured worse during SAS selection, during operations in mountains where weakness meant death. He hauled himself through the hatch onto a rooftop helipad just as the tyrant's claw swiped at his boots. Doyle and Chen grabbed him, pulled him clear, and Catherine slammed the hatch shut. It wouldn't hold long. Already they could hear the tyrant battering against it from below. But it bought seconds. The rooftop was a small mercy of open space and breathable air. 3 helicopter pads, one with an umbrella transport chopper sitting ready, rotors already beginning to turn. A pilot in corporate livery was performing pre-flight, apparently oblivious to the chaos below. "Everyone to the helicopter," Statham ordered. The civilians didn't need encouragement. They ran for the aircraft like it was salvation made manifest. But Statham's instincts were screaming. This was too easy, too convenient. After everything they'd been through, a fueled helicopter with a ready pilot just waiting? He caught up to Birkin, grabbed the researcher by the collar. "What aren't you telling me?" "What? Don't lie to me. That chopper's been waiting. The pilot's been waiting. This was planned." Birkin's expression cracked, guilt flooding through. I called ahead when the breach started. Arranged priority evacuation for essential personnel. The pilot thinks he's extracting research staff." "Research staff," Catherine said, catching up to them. "Not civilians." "He'll take us anyway," Birkin insisted. "I'll order him to. I have authority." The hatch they'd come through exploded outward. The tyrant pulled itself onto the roof, rising to its full height, its clawed arms spread wide. And now, with room to maneuver and nothing to hide behind, Statham saw exactly how outmatched they were. The thing was nearly 4 meters tall, built like a tank, and absolutely fixated on killing them. "Get to the helicopter," he shouted. "I'll hold it." "You can't," Catherine began. "I can buy you 30 seconds. Use them." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes. But she was too good an operator to waste the opening. She turned and ran, herding civilians toward the aircraft. Statham unslung the M4, dropped to one knee, and opened fire. Full automatic, every round placed with precision, born of 2 decades of combat experience. He targeted the tyrant's eyes, its exposed throat, the joints that earlier rounds had weakened. The creature staggered under the assault, but kept coming, adaptive biology already compensating for damage. The M4's bolt locked back on an empty chamber. Statham dropped it, pulled the Spey-S-12 from his back, and fired buckshot point-blank into the tyrant's advancing form. Each blast pushed the creature back slightly, buying inches that became feet. Behind him, he could hear the helicopter's engines spooling up to full power. Almost there. Almost ready. The shotgun ran dry. The tyrant was 3 meters away and closing. Statham pulled the ceramic blade from his boot, laughably inadequate against this monster, but it was all he had left. "Come on then," he muttered, settling into a fighting stance. "Let's dance." The tyrant's claw swept in an arc that would have bisected him if he hadn't dropped into a slide, passing under the strike quickly and coming up inside the creature's reach. The ceramic blade punched into exposed muscle tissue between bone plates, and Statham dragged it sideways, opening a wound that leaked dark fluid. The tyrant backhanded him with its other claw. Statham felt ribs crack as he flew backward, hit the rooftop hard enough to see stars. Through blurred vision, he saw the creature looming over him, preparing to deliver a killing strike. Then automatic fire erupted from behind the tyrant. Catherine, returning despite orders, firing an MP5 into the creature's back. The tyrant turned toward this new threat, and Statham used the distraction to roll aside as a claw smashed into concrete where he'd been lying. "I told you to get on the helicopter," he shouted, climbing painfully to his feet. "And I decided you don't get to die playing hero." She fired back, ejecting an empty magazine and slamming home a fresh one. "Now get to the chopper, I'll—" The sound came from everywhere and nowhere. A deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through Statham's bones. The tyrant froze mid-attack, its posture shifting from aggressive to confused. No, not confused. Summoned. From the stairwell access on the opposite side of the roof, another figure emerged. The woman from the security footage. Asian features, tactical gear, professional operator's stance. She held a device that was emitting the resonant tone, and the tyrant was responding to it like a trained dog to a whistle. "Ada Wong," Birkin breathed from near the helicopter. "Corporate spy, Wesker's agent." The woman, Ada, regarded them with cool assessment. "Dr. Birkin, I'll be taking your G-virus samples now. You can either hand them over or I can let my borrowed pet finish what it started." Birkin clutched his briefcase tighter. "The G-virus is proprietary Umbrella research. You have no rights?" Ada's laugh was cold. "Doctor, Raccoon City is dying because of your rights. Thousands dead, thousands more infected. And you're worried about intellectual property." She had a point, Statham had to admit, even as he maneuvered to position himself between her and the civilians. "You're the one who caused the containment breach." "I accelerated an inevitable outcome," Ada corrected. "Umbrella's security was already failing. I simply expedited the process while acquiring assets my employer values. The device in her hand emitted another pulse, and the tyrant took a step toward them. Last chance, Doctor. The samples, or everyone on this roof dies. The helicopter was fully spooled now, pilots shouting for them to board. Civilians were crammed inside, Doyle helping the last ones up. Chen was torn between duty to Umbrella and basic human survival. Birkin looked at his briefcase, at the tyrant, at the survivors. Whatever was in his case, this G-virus he'd mentioned, was apparently worth more to him than life itself. Statham could see the calculation happening behind the researcher's eyes. "Don't," Statham said quietly. "Whatever's in there, it's not worth." Birkin made his choice. He turned and ran for the helicopter, clutching the briefcase like a drowning man with a life preserver. Ada sighed, disappointed but not surprised. The device pulsed again, and the tyrant charged, not at Birkin, but at the helicopter itself. At the civilians packed inside, at the only escape route. "No!" Catherine opened fire, trying to divert its attention, but the creature was locked on target now. Statham didn't think. 20 years of training and instinct took over. He sprinted toward the tyrant's path, calculating intercept vectors. Knowing he'd never make it, but trying anyway, because that's what you did. You tried, even when the math said failure was certain. He hit the tyrant at a dead run, all of his body weight behind the impact, ceramic blade driving into the creature's side one more time. It was like trying to tackle a freight train. The tyrant barely noticed, just swatted him aside like an insect. But it was enough. The creature's path deviated by crucial degrees. Instead of hitting the helicopter directly, it crashed into the landing skid, tearing metal but not breaching the cabin. The pilot screamed, pulled collective, and the aircraft lurched into the air with its cargo hold door still open and Birkin hanging half in, half out. The tyrant grabbed for the rising helicopter, claws catching Birkin's leg. The researcher screamed, clutching the briefcase with one hand and the cabin frame with the other. For a frozen moment, the helicopter strained upward while the tyrant pulled down, and Birkin was the rope in a lethal game of tug-of-war. Then the briefcase fell. It tumbled through the air, hit the rooftop, and split open. Glass vials shattered, spilling luminescent liquid across concrete. The G-virus, whatever it was, spread in a glowing pool. The tyrant released Birkin, all its attention suddenly on the spilled samples. The helicopter shot upward, gaining altitude rapidly, Birkin still screaming from inside. Within seconds, it was 50 meters up and accelerating away from the facility. Leaving Statham, Catherine, Ada, and Chen on a rooftop with a bioweapon and what was apparently a virus important enough to kill for. Ada looked at the spilled G-virus, then at Statham, genuine frustration crossing her professional mask. "Well, this is unfortunate. For you, maybe," Statham said, climbing to his feet despite ribs that screamed protest. "I just care about getting off this roof alive." "Then we have aligned interests." Ada pulled out a grappling gun, because of course she did, Statham thought bitterly, and fired it at an adjacent building. "I'd suggest you find your own exit. That tyrant's control is temporary, and when it wears off..." She was gone, zipping across the gap between buildings with professional efficiency, leaving them with a bioweapon that was currently lapping up virus samples like a cat with spilled milk. "The stairs," Catherine said urgently. "Back the way we came." "Compromised," Chen reminded her. "Infected throughout the shaft." "Then we find another way down," Statham said, looking around the rooftop. 3 helipads, various ventilation units, and there, on the southern edge, a maintenance platform with external stairs that zigzagged down the building's face. They ran for it as the tyrant finished its bizarre feeding on the virus samples and seemed to remember they existed. The creature's roar followed them across the rooftop, but they hit the stairs before it could intercept. The external stairway was a nightmare of rusted metal and questionable welds, swaying under their weight as they descended. 5 stories down, 4, 3. Behind them, the tyrant reached the top of the stairs and began its pursuit, each step causing the entire structure to shudder. "It's going to collapse," Catherine shouted over the screaming metal. "Then we jump." Statham reached a platform 2 stories above street level, saw a dumpster below filled with trash bags. Not ideal, but better than riding a collapsing stairway to the ground. "On my mark, jump for the dumpster." They jumped. Statham hit the trash bags hard, garbage cushioning the impact enough to avoid serious injury. Catherine landed beside him a second later, then Chen. Above, the tyrant's weight finally exceeded the stairway's tolerance. Metal screamed, rivets popped, and the entire structure peeled away from the building face, crashing down with the tyrant still on it. The creature hit the ground in a tangle of metal debris, buried under collapsed stairway. Not dead. Statham could hear it moving under the wreckage, but delayed. They climbed out of the dumpster into an alley that opened onto a street full of infected. The moaning started immediately, dozens of dead eyes turning toward fresh prey. "This way." Chen led them toward a side street, less populated, offering a temporary corridor through the mob. They ran through hell's suburbs, weaving between abandoned cars and shambling horrors, weapons long since expended. The sound reached them first, a deep, rhythmic thumping growing louder. Then the UH-60 Blackhawk appeared over the building tops, military markings clear on its fuselage, door gunner scanning the streets below. "U.S. military." Catherine waved her arms frantically, trying to signal. "We're survivors. We're not infected." For a horrible moment, Statham thought they'd be ignored or, worse, strafed as potential infection vectors. Then the Black Hawk banked toward them, descending toward an intersection clear enough for landing. They ran for it, infected converging from all directions. The helicopter touched down, crew chief already extending a hand to pull them aboard. Catherine first, then Chen, then... Statham felt the bite on his calf. Teeth tearing, continue 22 and 27 through fabric and skin. He looked down to see an infected that had been laying prone, camouflaged among corpses, now latched onto his leg. The world seemed to slow as he processed what had happened. Bitten, infected, compromised. "Go!" he shouted at the helicopter, even as the crew chief reached for him. "I'm bitten. I'm infected." "Like hell." Catherine leaned out, grabbed his vest, and hauled with strength born of desperation. The infected came with them, still attached, teeth sunk deep. Statham brought his elbow down on the thing's skull repeatedly until it finally released, falling away as the helicopter lifted. The crew chief slammed the door shut as they gained altitude. Below, Raccoon City spread out like a cancer, fires burning, streets choked with infected. The Umbrella facility already beginning to collapse as its compromised systems failed completely. A medic was examining Statham's leg, cleaning the wound with professional efficiency. "Bites deep. We'll need to monitor for infection. But if we got you fast enough..." "How fast is fast enough?" Statham asked. "We don't know," the medic admitted. "Nobody knows. The virus is still being analyzed." Catherine sat beside him, blood-stained and exhausted, but alive. "You came back for me on the roof." "You came back for me first," he pointed out, so we're even. Love, we're not even close to even. I still owe you a drink when this is over. If you don't turn into a zombie first. Always a catch, isn't there? The Black Hawk banked away from Raccoon City, heading toward what the crew chief called safe quarantine zones outside the city limits. Behind them, the city of the dead receded into smoke and distance. In the cargo bay, Chen sat with his head in his hands. Everything he'd believed about Umbrella shattered. Catherine inventoried injuries. Nothing critical, all survivable. And Statham sat with a bite wound that might kill him slower than the tyrant would have killed him fast, wondering if survival was just another word for delayed death. But he was breathing. His people were breathing. Against every odd, against every horror Umbrella had created, they'd made it out. The rest, the infection, the quarantine, the government response, that was tomorrow's problem. Today, Jason Statham had done what he'd been hired to do. Even if the client was long dead and the payment would never come, he'd survived. And in Raccoon City's final hours, that was the only victory that mattered. The military quarantine zone was a hastily erected city of canvas and chain-link fence 30 kilometers outside Raccoon City's borders. Refugees filled processing tents by the hundreds. Survivors pulled from the outer suburbs before the cordon tightened. Evacuees from early helicopter runs, anyone who'd made it out before the government sealed the city like a tomb. Statham sat in a medical isolation unit, wrist zip-tied to a hospital bed, while doctors in hazmat suits monitored his vitals every 30 minutes. The bite wound on his calf had been cleaned, stitched, and wrapped in sterile dressing, but everyone who looked at it wore the same expression, waiting for him to turn. 72 hours, they'd told him. If he made it 72 hours without symptoms, he might be clear. Might. The T-virus was still poorly understood outside Umbrella's classified research, and the military doctors were working from incomplete data and autopsy reports that painted a grim picture. Hour 6. No fever, no discoloration, no necrosis. Catherine visited during her own medical screening, still wearing borrowed military fatigues since her clothes had been incinerated per biohazard protocol. "You look terrible," she observed, sitting in the plastic chair outside the containment barrier. "You should see the other bloke," Statham replied, gesturing at the bandaged leg. "Oh, wait, you did. Right before I stomped its head in." "How are you, really? Hungry? Bored? Wondering if I'm going to spend my last hours as a human being zip-tied to a bed in Ohio?" He tested the restraint, military grade, designed to hold, even if he started exhibiting enhanced infected strength. Could be worse. Could be still in that facility. "Birkin made it out," Catherine said. "Saw him being escorted to a secure area under guard. Army intelligence wants to debrief him about Umbrella's research. Good luck getting anything useful. Man sold out his own species for a briefcase full of virus samples, which are now spread across a rooftop being bombed by the Air Force." Catherine pulled out a contraband chocolate bar, where she'd gotten it, Statham didn't ask, and passed it through the barrier's food slot. "Heard from command. They're planning complete sterilization of Raccoon City. Fuel air bombs to create firestorm temperatures hot enough to denature viral proteins. Nothing survives." Statham unwrapped the chocolate slowly, savoring the small comfort. How many didn't make it out? 100,000, give or take. City population was just over 120,000 before outbreak. Current refugee count is 18,000. The math was brutal. Over 100,000 dead or infected, the entire city about to be reduced to ash. And Umbrella Corporation still existed somewhere in the world, still operated laboratories, still created bioweapons. Raccoon City wasn't an ending. It was a symptom. The others? He asked. Our people from the RPD? All clear so far. Doyle's being treated for concussion. Chen's in psychiatric observation, complete breakdown once the adrenaline wore off. The civilians are in family housing, getting counseling and waiting for relocation assignments. The girl? The one with her mother? Safe. Asking about you, actually. Wanted to thank the scary man who saved us. Catherine smiled slightly. You made an impression? Hour 12. Minor fever, 99.8 degree highs. Within normal range for stress and injury, but the doctors looked concerned. A new visitor arrived during hour 15, a woman in a crisp suit that looked absurdly out of place in the refugee camp. She carried a briefcase and the entitled posture of someone accustomed to access being granted automatically. Mr. Statham, I'm Jennifer Haas, legal counsel for the Umbrella Corporation. She didn't wait for invitation, just positioned herself outside the containment barrier like she owned it. I'm here to discuss a settlement offer. Settlement, Statham repeated flatly. Your company turned a city into a graveyard and you want to settle? We want to ensure your cooperation and silence regarding certain proprietary information you may have observed during the incident. She opened the briefcase, produced a contract. In exchange for signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waiving all future legal claims, Umbrella is prepared to offer substantial compensation. 7 figures, Mr. Statham. Enough to retire comfortably and never work again. He looked at the contract, at the zeros on the settlement figure, at this corporate lawyer who'd probably never seen an infected in person trying to buy his silence about the end of the world. No, he said simply. Haas blinked. I'm sorry? No. I'm not signing your bloody paper. I'm not taking your money. And the moment I'm out of this containment unit, I'm talking to every journalist, every government agency, every person who'll listen about what Umbrella did. Mr. Statham, I strongly advise you to reconsider. Umbrella has significant resources and I've survived things that would give your corporate thugs nightmares. Your threats don't scare me, your money doesn't interest me, and your company can rot. He met her eyes through the plastic barrier. Now get out before I decide that zip tie isn't enough to keep me from showing you exactly what I learned in Raccoon City. Haas left, heels clicking with offended authority. Catherine, who'd watched the exchange from the corner, started laughing, genuine, relieved laughter that spoke of tension finally breaking. You just told Umbrella Corporation to sod off, she said. They're going to make your life hell. Let them try. I've been through actual hell. Their corporate version can queue up with the rest. Hour 24. Fever holding at 100.2 degrees. Bite wound showing no signs of infection or necrosis. Doctors cautiously optimistic, but maintaining protocols. Chen visited during hour 30, looking haggard but more composed than Catherine had described. They're asking me to testify, he said, remaining well back from the barrier. Congressional hearing about Umbrella's domestic operations. They want to know everything: facility layouts, research projects, security protocols. You going to tell them? Statham asked. I don't know. I signed NDAs, took oaths. But after what I saw, Chen looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I helped them, you know. I provided security for experiments on living people. I told myself I didn't know what was happening in the labs, that I was just doing my job. But I knew. Deep down, I always knew. So make it mean something, Statham said. Testify. Burn the whole corporation down. Can't fix what you did, but you can stop them doing it again. They'll destroy me. Legal actions, professional blacklisting, possibly worse. Probably, Statham agreed. But you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror. That's worth more than you'd think. Chen left without committing either way. But Statham thought he saw determination replacing despair in the man's eyes. Whether it would last through Umbrella's inevitable pressure was another question. Hour 48. Fever broken. Bite wound healing normally. Blood work showing no viral markers. Doctors beginning to discuss release protocols. The real visitor came during hour 56, when Statham was beginning to believe he might actually survive uninfected. The man wore a black suit that screamed federal agent. With sunglasses he didn't remove despite being indoors, and the kind of rigid posture that suggested military background. Mr. Statham, Albert Wesker, Special Tactics and Rescue Service. He showed credentials that looked legitimate, but felt wrong somehow. I have questions about Dr. Birkin and the G-virus samples you witnessed. Something about this man set off every alarm Statham had developed over 2 decades in the field. The way he moved. Too controlled, too precise. The way he looked at the medical equipment, with familiarity that suggested extensive personal experience. The complete lack of normal human tells in his body language. "You're not government," Statham said carefully. "You're Umbrella." Wesker smiled, and it was like watching a predator bare its teeth. "I'm many things, Mr. Statham. Currently, I'm someone with questions you're going to answer. Currently zip-tied to a bed, so my cooperation is limited. The restraint is irrelevant." Wesker moved closer to the barrier, and for the first time, Statham noticed his eyes behind those sunglasses. Wrong somehow, reflecting light at odd angles. "You encountered Ada Wong on the facility roof. She's a person of significant interest. What did she say? Where did she go?" "She stole your virus and buggered off with a grappling hook. That's all I know." "You're lying." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. Ada operates for a rival organization, but her methods are predictable. She wouldn't leave empty-handed unless she had a backup acquisition target. What else did you see? Statham considered his options. This man, if he was still a man, wasn't constrained by laws or ethics. The medical barrier between them was plastic and hope, nothing that would actually stop him if he decided to extract information by force. There was another figure, Statham said, mixing truth with fiction to sell the lie. In the facility, during the chaos, black tactical gear, male, moving with Ada's team, could have been her extraction backup. Wesker's head tilted slightly, processing this information. "Describe him." Didn't get a clear look. Saw him on security feed for maybe 3 seconds before the feed cut. The lie came easily. Statham had run intelligence operations where deception meant survival. Ada seemed to be coordinating with him via comms. It was what Wesker wanted to hear, confirmation of a larger conspiracy, multiple operatives in play. The kind of information that would send him hunting ghosts while Statham and the others faded from his attention. "If you're lying to me, Mr. Statham, I'll know. And I'll come back." Wesker straightened his sunglasses. "The military thinks they're containing this outbreak. They're wrong. Raccoon City is just the beginning. Umbrella's research will continue, the viruses will spread, and people like you, survivors with interesting resistance factors, will become very valuable." "Is that a threat?" "It's a forecast." Wesker moved toward the exit, then paused. "One more thing. That bite on your leg, you should be dead or infected by now. The T-virus has a 98% transmission rate through fluid contact. Yet here you sit, healing normally, showing no symptoms. That makes you an anomaly, Mr. Statham. And Umbrella collects anomalies. He left, and Statham felt cold despite the fever he'd been running. Wesker's interest was potentially more dangerous than the infection itself. At least viruses could be fought with medicine and immune response. Corporate obsession with valuable specimens was a different kind of threat entirely. Hour 70. Blood work clean. Viral markers absent. Bite wound healing with minimal scarring. Doctors beginning discharge paperwork. Catherine was there when they cut the zip tie, marking his official transition from quarantine patient to cleared survivor. "Congratulations," she said. "You're officially not a zombie. Best news I've had all week." Statham flexed his wrist, circulation returning in painful tingles. "What's the latest on the city?" "Sterilization bombing happens at 0600 tomorrow. They're giving final warnings now for anyone still inside to reach extraction points, but..." She shrugged helplessly. "Realistically, anyone still in Raccoon City is already dead or infected. This is just making it official." "And after?" "Congressional investigations, lawsuits, criminal charges if they can make them stick to Umbrella's executives. The company's already pivoting. Press releases about rogue researchers, isolated incidents, promises of comprehensive safety reviews." Catherine's expression was bitter. "They'll survive. Corporations always do. They'll rebrand, reorganize, move operations overseas, and in 5 years they'll be back to business as usual." Statham thought about Wesker's parting words, about viruses spreading, about being valuable to collectors of anomalies. "Not if we don't let them. We. Your BSAA material, whether you know it or not." He'd heard about the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance forming in response to Umbrella's atrocities. International task force dedicated to preventing future outbreaks. Anti-bioterrorism operations, stopping corporations like Umbrella before they can create another Raccoon City. You've got the skills, the experience, and the motivation. "What about you?" Catherine asked. "What's Jason Statham going to do now that he's survived the impossible?" He thought about it. About going back to private security, to extraction jobs and corporate bodyguard work, to pretending the world was still the same as it had been before Raccoon City. About living comfortably on blood money while Umbrella continued its research in facilities across the globe. "I'm going to be a problem," he decided. "For Umbrella. For anyone else who thinks bioweapons are acceptable. For every corporate monster who believes profit justifies genocide. I'm going to be the kind of problem that doesn't go away quietly." Catherine smiled, fierce and genuine. "I'll drink to that. Once you buy me that drink, you owe me." "Deal, assuming we survive whatever comes next." "Always a catch," she said, echoing his earlier words. The medical staff released him with a clean bill of health, vaccination records, and strict instructions to report any delayed symptoms. Statham walked out of the isolation unit into the refugee camp's organized chaos, breathing free air for the first time in 3 days. Doyle found them near the mess tent, his head still bandaged, but his grin intact. "Heard you told Umbrella's lawyer to piss off. That true?" "More or less," Statham confirmed. "Beautiful." Doyle clapped him on the shoulder carefully, mindful of injuries. "Most of our people are asking about you. Word's gotten around that you're the reason they made it out. They want to thank you properly." "I just did what needed doing. That's what makes it worth thanking." They found the survivors from their group in family housing, temporary but clean, safe, warm. The young girl ran up when she saw Statham, then stopped shyly, suddenly uncertain. Her mother followed, eyes red from crying but managing a smile. "We heard you were sick," the mother said. "We were worried." "I'm fine," Statham assured them. "Turns out I'm too stubborn to die from zombie bites." The girl looked up at him with that peculiar seriousness children get when processing trauma. "Are the monsters gone?" He wanted to lie, to tell her the nightmare was over and she'd never have to be afraid again. But he'd learned long ago that children deserved honesty, even when it was hard. "Some of them," he said, "but there might be more monsters in the world. That's why people like me and Officer Morrison are going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. We're going to fight them so kids like you can be safe." "Promise?" the girl asked. "Promise." She hugged him then, quick and fierce, before running back to her mother. The gesture hit Statham harder than he'd expected, a reminder of why the fight mattered beyond tactical objectives and operational success. Night fell over the quarantine camp. Statham, Catherine, and Doyle sat outside the mess tent with contraband beer someone had smuggled in, watching distant lights from Raccoon City's outskirts. In a few hours, those lights would be replaced by firestorms as the military erased the city from existence. "To the ones who didn't make it," Doyle said, raising his bottle. They drank to fallen officers, to civilians who died in the outbreak, to a city that would exist only in memory and classified files after tomorrow. "And to the ones who did," Catherine added, "against all odds." More drinking, this time to survival and stubborn refusal to die. Statham thought about the helicopter crash that had started this nightmare, about the client he'd been hired to extract. Long dead now, identity probably lost in the chaos. He'd failed that mission spectacularly, but he'd succeeded in one that mattered more, even if there'd been no contract and no payment. "What do we do now?" Doyle asked the question they were all thinking. "We heal," Statham said. "We testify at whatever hearings they throw at us. We make sure the world knows what Umbrella did, and then we make sure it never happens again." "Just the three of us against a multinational corporation," Catherine observed. "Odds aren't great." "I've survived worse odds in the past 72 hours. Statham finished his beer, set the bottle aside. "Besides, we're not alone. There are others. Survivors, investigators, people who saw what bioweapons can do. We find them, we organize, and we become Umbrella's worst nightmare." "BSAA?" Doyle said. "That's what they're calling it. Heard officers talking about international recruitment. They want people with experience in outbreak situations." "Then that's where we start." Statham stood, testing his leg. The bite wound pulled slightly, but held. Raccoon City ends tomorrow, but the fight against bioterrorism? That's just beginning. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Not weather, but military ordnance being positioned for the morning's sterilization. The city's death warrant being prepared with precision and regret. But Jason Statham had learned something in those hellish streets and underground laboratories. He'd learned that ordinary people facing impossible horror could still choose to fight, to survive, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He'd learned that corporate monsters could bleed. And most importantly, he'd learned that some nightmares could be ended, not with heroic speeches or dramatic gestures, but with brutal competence and absolute refusal to quit. Raccoon City had tested him in ways 2 decades of combat never had. He'd passed. An Umbrella Corporation, along with every other organization that thought bioweapons were acceptable, was about to discover exactly what it meant to have Jason Statham as an enemy.